so much for coming out to New Orleans Crime and Suspense Fiction. I am Megan, I'm the festival director. I'm not going to tell you everything we do today, but I am going to tell you that we love to support our local indie booksellers. So we have a way to support 2 local independently owned bookstores during this festival. Number 1, right outside, you'll see Candace with Tubby & Coo's Traveling Bookstore. Anyone that you see up here on this stage or out there on that stage during the festival will have their book for sale with Candace. Number 2, next door, there are more books. There are so many more books at Community Book Center. So each panel, we are giving away, if I can find my phone, we are giving away a $25 gift card to Community Book Center. And I randomly drew a name from everyone who RSVP'd for today. And the winner of this session's $25 Community Book Center gift card is Dorothy Tarver. Is Dorothy here? If Dorothy rolls in, we'll get her a gift card. And now I am going to turn it over to Karen Kirsting from the Pinkley Prizes for Crime Fiction. Their organization is generously sponsoring this panel, and they're going to say a few words about the prizes in crime fiction.
Hi, so I have a big construction site voice, so I don't think I need the microphone today. I'll share with somebody else. But good afternoon, and welcome to this afternoon session, which is the New Orleans Crime and Suspense Fiction. My name is Karen Kirsting. I'm the treasurer of the Pinkley Prize Memorial Foundation, who is sponsoring this session. Our foundation is pleased to support words and music, and to have this opportunity to tell you a little bit more about our mission. Our foundation was named in honor of Diana Pinkley, a longtime crime fiction columnist for the New Orleans Times-Picayune, a civic activist, and an advocate for promoting women writers in the crime fiction genre. Since 2015, we have continued this advocacy, establishing a contest for women writers and annually awarding both a debut author and an established author a $2,500 cash prize. Next March, we will celebrate our 10th anniversary in conjunction with the Tennessee Williams Festival and plan to offer a day of seminars for writers and readers interested in crime fiction. Several of our past winners will also be participating in this event, so please stay tuned to the Tennessee Williams Festival website and to our website. However, with our website, please give us a month because we're redoing everything and we want to have all the right information available to you when you're ready to check us out. So now, crime and suspense fiction certainly provides a most cathartic and emotional experience for both writer and reader. In a city such as ours, where the possibility for criminal activity walks hand in hand with our politics and our beloved cultural traditions, and where suspense has a place behind masks, within conversations, and along parade routes, surely this session would be the most interesting. So let's get started.
I tell you what, with an introduction like that, I feel like I barely need to say anything at all. Karen summed it up. This city is host to everything under the sun when it comes to mischief, miscreancy, and wrongdoing. And what we have today is a celebration of the same in fiction. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Benjamin Morris. I'm a writer here in town. And I'm also, in another life, a host for a crime podcast run by the Arcadia Publishing Network. It's called Crime Capsule. So every week I have the privilege of reading books by true crime authors and talking to them about their work, except it's all nonfiction. So today I am super excited to get to speak to 2 guys who have published amazing books in fiction and for this change of pace, and these books are nothing short of marvelous. To my immediate right, we have Danny Cherry Jr., who is the author of The Pike Boys. Pike Boys, the novel, came out in January of 2024. So we realized with some amazement we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of this publication.
Yeah, that was great.
Love it. We're going to get deep into the 1920s New Orleans very shortly here. And at the far right, we have Michael Allen Zell, who is the author of The Last Shadow, which is set in contemporary New Orleans. Michael is a veteran of the New Orleans literary scene. He's published 6 novels to date. Danny's novel is his debut novel, but he writes like a veteran. It is a wonderful piece of work. So join me in welcoming Michael Allen Zell and Danny Cherry Jr. So, I want to talk about how we're going to structure this conversation. The first thing to say is that I want this very much to be participatory. We're going to leave some time at the end for questions and answers and discussion and so forth. Because I know that if you're here, you love a good story, you probably love a good crime novel, and we want to hear from you. So please be thinking about what you would like to ask Michael and Danny. We'd love to hear your perspectives. New Orleans, as we know, is a city which is host to all sorts of genres of literature. We have tragedy, we have comedy, romance, we have literary fiction, of course, we have satire. It's interesting, we have a lot of crime novels here, but we don't, interestingly, have a lot of true gangster novels, okay? So the closest thing that I came up with on my bookshelf, just sort of looking through, perhaps you guys know this particular title, Mr. New Orleans, Frenchy Gourliette's memoir. Again, nonfiction. But what I love about Michael and Danny's books is that they make a bold entry into specifically gangster fiction here, which is its own sub-genre of crime fiction that has rules and requirements and things to pay attention to. So, what I'm going to do is I am going to ask each of our authors just a couple of questions about their books, and then I've got questions for both of our authors together, and then we're going to open it up to the floor. So Michael, I'd like to start with you, actually, talking about The Last Shadow. This is a remarkable piece of work. It feels very cutting edge, very contemporary, very concerned with the things of New Orleans today. Can you tell us, how did you get the idea for this particular book after your other 5?
Sure. You know, one thing I do want to touch on real quick now
Please.
is for Mr. New Orleans. So if you don't know Mr. New Orleans, Frenchie was a Cajun kid back from decades ago, came to New Orleans, started doing odd jobs, and ends up with basically the upper level mafia. He's the connected guy doing all these things. One key thing about this book is he stops naming names after a certain point. So that's important. That the reason that I say that is why do I write fiction and not nonfiction? Is because I know too much, so I can change names and situations and put that in a novel, and then it's considered you're telling a story. So I'm weaving together a story, but there are definitely elements in Shadow and all my other books that are things that I know, that are things. So I guess I kind of start for this book and any book with what ifs. And one big what if was, you know what, I do martial arts, I love martial arts movies, but what if I wrote a book that was for everybody, not just somebody that's going to be excited about the new Michael Jai White or a Bruce Lee retrospective, but something that's very martial arts, has this philosophy, but everybody would enjoy it. It feels like a true New Orleans drama. And then the other thing, and this is true as well, I read criminology books, a little bit of this and that, and also as much New Orleans background. Like if you follow social media, the New Orleans Data Center, their posts are incredible, and the research they do is stellar. So I learn a lot from that, just things about the city that go statistically a little bit deeper than what we know, the beating heart of the city. And I was reading a book about, in New York, there was, back in 1991, there was a gang crackdown. Now we know the big names like the Italian gangs, of course, glorified in movies and TV, but they went after everybody. And as I'm reading through this, okay, it's fairly dry. Until I got to one sentence, something I'd never seen before in print, I've never heard anybody talk about it. And in Chinatown, in Manhattan, there were 2 different gangs. One of those gangs was using young Vietnamese teenagers to do the dirty work. Shake down the shopkeeper, beat up somebody, send a message, whatever. And the sentence said, in the aftermath of this crackdown, is some members of this particular Vietnamese gang were thought to have fled to the eastern part of New Orleans in an area called Versailles. And I was like, what? So in my mind, okay, what if just one of those guys came and was running things in that area, And what if those two New York gangs were actually the composite of one gang, and that was one of the three characters that I looked at?
That is a phenomenal departure point, especially because it's so grounded in this very world. Some of our readers here may be familiar with Nathaniel Rich's novel King Zeno, which is set in 1917, 1918, I believe, right when the Industrial Canal was being dug. And in Nat's book, came out a couple of years ago, he has this premise that he works with, and you work with it as well, and you're a student, towns within towns, okay? You can have folks who grow up in different parts of the city whose circles, orbits, geographies never overlap, but for all intents and purposes, they actually live in two different New Orleanses, right? And both of y'all are kind of preoccupied with what it means to have people having one cultural, social, racial, and class-based geography suddenly colliding with another and all the friction that results with that. So Michael, can you tell us a little bit about how the concept of towns within towns works in The Last Shadow, because it's really important for you.
I'm glad you mentioned it. You saw me light up and rise up immediately because the, actually, could you hold up the book?
Yeah, sure.
Even if I think it closer. So this is the visual, but what it doesn't give you is, for fun, because I like constraints, because there's so many ways that you can take things, is I love the idea of sort of this character and geographical triangle. So exactly what Ben was stating is, okay, what if you have two people that live on the opposite sides of town? So all the way off the Chef in the east, right before you're going to cross the lake, go up to the North Shore, and then somebody in the riverbed. What if two people that met in another place, came to New Orleans at different times, live in completely different parts of town, could have never interacted except one person, and this is what makes the two the triangle, rather than just a simple line. What if this one person brings them together? So in the book, the key locations are Versailles, out by Michoud in the east, the River Bend, and then City Park. So that kind of makes our triangle. So for me, I moved to New Orleans 2 years before Katrina. I didn't try to, I didn't actually write at all until I was probably 2010, something like that. I was the kid who did all that, and it just really wasn't encouraged, and I didn't truly step into it until a few years after Katrina. But when I did, I knew enough that I'm going to write about my neck of the woods, because I know that well enough and I can make sense of that. And Shadow was the first book that okay, I'm going to cover the city, and I felt comfortable enough to do that.
So we need to ask about your characters. They are driven, they are ambitious, they fight for what they want, they defend what they love, each in their own ways, and that, of course, creates a lot of conflict and tension. How did you meet your characters? They're really memorable.
So I initially identified with Julius Mosley. So Mosley he's a guy who's a younger man who's kind of a mess. He's found a way to live in New Orleans and live by code. That so the city doesn't eat him up in some way. If you don't live with some kind of code, New Orleans can be tough for a lot of people. And he was the character that I most identified with in an aspirational way. And I sort of saw, not that his voice was my voice, but I just connected with him more. And frankly, I thought it was his book. It wasn't until I was several edits through that I realized that the real story is actually the Maya Gaines story, who is the young lady who life has sort of been this rug that's been pulled out from underneath her. She thought it was going to be this, and then some things went out with her parents. She's finding sort of her path and confidence because of being exceptional martial arts. And that's not just the physical, that's the mental, that's all that does for you on the inside. And once that started to shift, that's when it got fun for me. Because I've never operated by usually the maxim is write what you know. I go the Toni Morrison route, because most people don't know anything, including myself. So write what you want to learn, and then that's what you can dig into. Because for me to write about a young woman, black woman in her early 20s, that's not my background. That's not my lived experience. So that meant I got more work. So stepping away from Stephen Mosley, that was what was fun for me. And then so the crime boss didn't win for his part, that was also fun because I want to make sure that I'm doing that. So the fun part for me for any characters is being true to them, and it's also a fine line, and Dana and I talked about this before, is you have to, I guess, consider audience, because you can write a New Orleans book that's straight up for New Orleans people, that anybody who hasn't lived here, spent any time here, they might not get it at all. But if you write also for the general public or people that haven't been here, well, you might miss some nuances because you're just glossing over that. So it's kind of a fine line that you have to hit. And one of the reasons I love writing crime fiction is sense of place tends to be stronger. When I'm traveling somewhere, I tend to read the crime fiction books for that. And you can also hit more of a range of social strata. So you can, where in general fiction, you don't maybe get so much of that. So, for me, to have those elements, but then enjoy your characters within them, that's what it's all about.
I'm going to come to Danny in just a quick second here. The last question I have for you, Michael, about Shadow is, and your characters are great. I think my favorite had to be Sister Pat, and we can talk about why Sister Pat is so interesting. Both Danny and Michael are really attuned in their characterization to folks who are not just the main characters, but folks who are on the periphery thereof and act in integral ways to the ecosystems of the crime that is taking place. The eyes and ears. You always got to watch out for the eyes and ears of the actual protagonists or antagonists, because they're just as essential to the folks who are actually raising the baseball bat, as anybody else is. So I'm Team Sister Pat all the way in Last Shadow. The last question I have for you, Michael, before we turn to the Pike Boys, is, and this is a fundamental question about the heart of The Last Shadow, which is the book within the book, right? We have to understand what is going on with the text, that the martial arts text, the meditation text that the main characters encounter in different ways, okay? There is a long history, as we all know, being readers of books within books. So you have Prospero, right, in Shakespeare, who has his book. You have the use of the I Ching in The Man in the High Castle, right, Philip K. Dick. There are sort of talismanic or totemic texts which serve functions in books that speak both to the act of reading, also to the act of agency. I even thought something like the tattoos in Memento by Christopher Nolan serve as a text, right, written on the man's body to sort of guide him through his story. So, last question, Michael, tell us about the actual Last Shadow text and what that means for this novel.
Sure. So and there are layers to it. You can take it as just a straightforward read without any of that, but the deeper route is what Ben is speaking of, and that is simply this: rather than chapter numbers solely, I have call these aphorisms, statements. Some of them are contradictory, but they're similar to the Tao Te Ching, maybe a book of Buddhist scriptures. But essentially, I wrote those myself, which was a blast, but inspired by some of those different writings. So the book, The Last Shadow itself, is the book that for Julius Mosley, that's been his guide when he was a drunk, as a falling down drunk, marriage falling apart guy in New York, and now a man in New Orleans who lives by a code. That's been his book for him to live by and shape his life. And when he teaches a martial arts class, it's not just, again, about the physical, it's about retraining your mind. And it ends up being something that he instills in my games. And ultimately, it's, like as Ben was speaking of, you can take that as deeply as you wish, where that the actual chapter headers might reflect, or the thing that I had fun with, rather than being kind of obvious, was, like an illustration, a picture that illustrates the text to come, but instead maybe it's a little different, so it requires the mind to bridge the gap. But why does the chapter begin with this after what I just read? So it requires each reader in a completely different way. It makes a different book because everybody's experience and background and reading experience is going to be different. So where you're going to bridge the gap for what you saw for the title head and what you just read is going to be different for everybody. So that was fun for me to do that.
Books within books, towns within towns, the layers go deep, deep, deep. Thank you, Michael. Danny, first of all, congratulations again on publication of your debut novel. Let's go straight to the 1920s, because if there is one fact on which we can all agree, it's everybody loves a bootlegger. I mean, come on, bootleggers, moonshiners, rum runners, you know, like they're just the best, flat out. And the stories are great, and the escapades are great, and you know, the cat and mouse, right, with the prohibition agents, always great. You can't beat it. Whenever on our radio show we get to interview an author who's done a prohibition era book, it's like, yes, bootleggers, you know, we're back to our bread and butter, it's the best. So you chose the 1920s for the Pike Boys, partly because of the intensity of the supervision and the oversight and the scrutiny that criminal activity was experiencing in those years. What else drove the decision to set the Pike Boys there?
I was obsessed with the TV show Boardwalk Empire, Peaky Blinders, and all that stuff. I like a lot of old shit, you know. I like a lot of like old, like timey stuff. And whenever I first wanted to like teach myself how to write, because I don't have an MFA or nothing like that, I just started like I needed a starting point. So I was like, I like this stuff. I write this problem, and then I just started practicing, and then I ended up, you know, kind of liking the final product.
It is just such a rip-roaring ride. Now, would you just describe the basic premise of the Pike Boys for readers who might not have had a chance to meet your book just yet?
Ooh, I'm so bad at this. Okay, so like, let me see how I compress 400 pages into a very succinct sentence. So it's essentially a crime family drama. It's kind of like Peaky Blinders, The Sopranos, based in 1920s New Orleans, and it follows it's the first book in what I want to be a series of the rise and fall of the Pike family, and it's about three brothers who own a brothel, and the middle brother, Jesse, he wants to see a way out, like, and get out of the crime life, and essentially it's not the most heavily plotted book, it's just following the family trying to claw their way out of, you know, the trauma and the poverty they grew up in by any means necessary. And in this particular book, it centers around a heist that gets them under the watch of an overzealous local DA who wants to run for mayor. And then from there, things just kind of, it's a series of unfortunate events for the Pike family. So yeah, that's pretty much what the first book is about, is, you know, watching them from their, I guess you could say, crime infancy become the people they're going to be by the end of the book. Kind of like a Shakespearean thing I'm going for.
Yeah, and I'm not going to spoil anything with what I say here, but I thought it was really interesting that there's one theory of novel writing, of course, which says that the only thing that's interesting is trouble, right? You got a character, you put him up a tree, your novel starts. Well, no, actually, your novel starts when you set the tree on fire. Okay, now you've got your story, the beginning to it. The only thing that's interesting is trouble. What is interesting about your book, Danny, is that you do start with the heist goes well. They actually get exactly what they need, and they're set up with this you know, pretty critical amount of investment in their future and so forth. And the whole time in those opening, you know, scenes, I was sort of thinking, something bad's gonna happen, something bad's gonna happen. It's like, no, they actually get away with it, which is, in a way, even more interesting as a premise, because now everything goes downhill from there, right? It's not like they have to ascend from the top. It's like boom. So was that deliberate? You wanted to see this family at the peak of its fortunes and then take them all the way down, or did you want to see them on the roller coaster ride?
I wanted to see them on a roller coaster ride. Honestly, like there's action and all that stuff in there, but when I wrote this, I was trying to do something more introspective and artistic and literary. Like, this entire book is just one big ass examination of the fact that humans can only do so much bad stuff before it starts to get to them, or it starts to catch up to them. And its entire premise is about, like, can you actually change? And with the Pike brothers, they grew up in an abusive, with an overly abusive, super religious, like, father. They were in poverty. Their mom was a drug addict. It was just all these different things, and I wanted to, like, show them trying to claw their way out of that. But in order to claw your way from under that, like, you can't just hard work your way out of that situation. You have to do some ugly stuff. And I kind of wanted to show, like, the ups and downs of what that does to someone. Because I feel like a lot of crime shows, they don't really do that. To some extent, I feel like they glorify the crime aspect of it. And it's like in real life, if you know anything about any of these real life gangsters, these dudes end up jacked up mentally if they're not dead by the time they're over. Because you can't just shoot somebody in the face and think you're gonna be okay after that.
I want to come to the violence here in a moment, but before we get there, I am curious, similar question to that of Michael. How did you meet your characters? How did you meet Jesse and Clyde and Rose and Cameron? And my favorite is Twitch. I think Twitch is just so incredibly well written and just affecting. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about him. But how did you meet your characters?
So actually, my dream was to be a comic book writer since I was a kid, and then I got to college, I started to come up with some comic book characters. And Jesse was actually a cowboy at one point. Clyde was just some random character I had no plans with, but I just drew up a psychological chart or whatever it's called, like a story bible for a character I had nothing to do with. And then I realized I had a better chance of winning the freaking lottery than making it into the comic book industry. So I started to teach myself how to write prose, and I was like, I already got these characters, I just need a setting, like Peaky Blinders. And I feel like New Orleans doesn't have a lot of gangster fiction that's set in that era, so I was like, oh, I got my first book.
And I mean, you have filled the gap beautifully. It is so immersive. And that raises, of course, the important question. How did you do your research? What kind of research did you do in order to take us back to 1920s New Orleans in terms of the physical layout of the city, in terms of the politics of the time? You have kind of a political party, which we don't have anymore, or which may never have existed in the book, right? Yeah. How did you do your research?
A whole lot of Googling, and I found like a low circulation book from some academic from the 70s who, I don't know how the hell he did this before computers, but he like pretty much had this broken down in chapters. It was called Unorganized Crime, and I can't pronounce his last name, but it's called Unorganized Crime, New Orleans from the 1920s to 1930s. And he had this broken down like prostitution, rum running, local corruption. He pretty much wrote an entire freaking Bible of everything that happened in New Orleans crime scene in the 1920s. So I've used that a lot, but I put my own spin on some stuff and also changed certain characters' names because I don't know how litigious some people's families are. So yeah.
Probably very is the answer, I am afraid.
I mean, one of those characters, I literally just changed a letter in their name. Like it's. I mean, if you know anything about New Orleans history, you'd be like, oh, that's the guy that used to.
That's there might be an attorney in the crowd who can get your back if you need it. I want to turn to the violence issue because your book does not shy away from it. It is fascinating to me because as you read the Pike Boys, and I really struggled on how to kind of frame this question. I'm still not entirely sure I've got it, but I'm going to give it a stab here. There is this very real tension between beauty and violence in your book. So your chapters can go from absolutely sterling depictions of a New Orleans sunset over the lake, right? The Lake Pontchartrain, to what happens when a guy beats up on a call girl in the brothel and has to be punished for his abuse of her. And it is graphic. I mean, he made his bed, and the white boys say, you gotta lie in it, and we see what happens, in those moments. But it's not just the level of your prose on the lines, the diction and so forth. It's also the content of what you're writing about. You're always going back and forth between what is utterly resplendent and gorgeous and transcendent and what is utterly base and horrific and traumatic. And it creates this effect that I cannot describe as a reader, honestly, Manny. It is hypnotic, and it is, if you had told me in I would believe you, because it is just so well done. And I'm so fascinated by what that produces as we, the readers, are left unsettled, uncertain, and never exactly knowing what is coming next. Can you talk about that? Can you help me to understand what you're doing with this tension, this polarity?
I mean, no one person, place, or thing is any one thing. I mean, New Orleans is a beautiful place. It also has a dark underbelly. It just depends on the class you're in. And that's why in this book I went back and forth between the back alleys and the the upper echelons of the old regulars. That's what the old regulars are the political party back then anyway. Because that's the truth of it. While they were skimming off of the city, they had people overdosing on heroin in back alleys. Like, so that's, I mean, you know, I wasn't trying to add attention. I was just trying to depict the world as I see it, which is New Orleans is a beautiful place. It's also ugly, and it's still ugly.
I mean, my copy has in the margins, thank you, just time and time again, some beautiful writing, like amazing, you know, just like stars and check marks all the way through, because it's really something else. And I hope we have time for each of our authors to maybe read us a very short passage from their books before we close out. But I have some questions for both of y'all, which is about the genre and the practice of this kind of writing. The first question I have is actually about how these books came to be in a different way. What was the path to publication for each of your novels? And Danny, why don't we start with you?
So yeah, I independently published my novel. That's pretty much it. I didn't want to like. So I started it like when I was in college, and I put it down for a while because I wanted to do freelance writing, which I do that too. Like I do. I'm a sometimes journalist. I don't like call myself a full-time journalist, but like. And then by that time, I just didn't feel like going through the grind of having to look for an agent, because it's like, I mean, not to sound full of myself, I knew it was a good book. I didn't need an agent to tell me that. And it's like, and then I started talking to other people who are traditionally published, and they were just straight up telling me these horror stories that unless you're J.K. Rowling or Stephen King, your ass all by yourself anyway. So why not just take most of the proceeds anyway? You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, I'm not gonna tell you a bunch of anecdotes, but that's pretty much what pushed me into just decide to do it. That like, I'd rather sink or swim on my own, and at least I get to keep all the money from it.
There you go. Did you work with anyone on like the layout? I mean, did you have beta and alpha readers kind of go over the manuscript and tell you what you know, get you some feedback and, you know, that kind of infrastructure that we often use as we're working with the manuscript?
Yeah, I mean, I sought out the help of people who still work in the industry. I wasn't just out here winging it. Like the book cover comes from the guy that does the book covers for Simon & Schuster over in Europe. The copy editor for that book was a dude who's worked with a bunch of other crime writers. I'm gonna name them all. So that's like that's what I work. And I also had like I think I don't know how many different beta readers, like a lot. It took me from beginning to end, like for the publication about 10 years. So over 10 years, like we're probably like 12 people.
They are the unsung heroes. I mean, you know, we owe them so much for the gifts of their time and their attention that they give us. So for sure. Michael, what was the path to publication for your book?
So mine was a little different. I had all my previous books, and then these include the Bobby Dellery series of two-lane criminologists who gets put in this position on the street, who's got to deal with Bill Lavender, who had been with UNO Press, and then Lavender Bean, which is mostly poetry. And I'm one of the few novelists that he was publishing. So Bill had published all the previous books, and then the one thing that I can't speak on other than just a general is one of those books is under shopping agreement. And when that happened, then the strike came, the writers' actors strike. So that put things in limbo, and I didn't want to continue with the Dellery series because things might change for that. That the book would need to reflect as well. But I had an idea for something that didn't really fit with that series, and I also knew that I needed to be able to write for screen as necessary. So I got a final draft, kind of developed my idea, and it was like the first script by a novelist, as in it was just too wordy. The actors and anybody else would be annoyed by all the stage directions. I was filling in the gaps too much. But I realized, you know what, actually the shape of this and fleshing it out would make a really good novel. And so back in 2022, that's where kind of the infancy of the Shadow started. And then at the same time, just because of what the big if of what may happen to the screen with the other book was, you know, I want complete rights for this. And I don't want to shop this around. I don't want to, some of the people that I'm working with had advised, if you have a good idea, you can copyright it, but that might not mean anything. You got to be really careful on your ideas and things getting out there. So what I decided to do was publish Shadow myself, and in doing so, we have it out there to saturate New Orleans as much as possible, and even have it such that, you know, for the concept, the title, the visual, that if somebody ripped it off, it would be pretty obvious. Now that said, the book cover did get ripped off for a movie poster, and I'm happy that the movie won. But they clearly took the cover.
Well, are you gonna name names or not?
I'm not naming names. I'm not naming. Well, you wouldn't know the movie because it did something like that. But what I had to learn, I've been in the book business. I've been a long-time reader. I pretty much everything that Bill was publishing, I was the one doing the promotion, the marketing, setting up events anyway. So the thing is, and this is anything that you do in an entrepreneurial sense, is you want to do as many things yourself that you can do, because then you don't have to pay somebody else, right? Everything you can do costs money. Well, I have no visual skills, so I'm not doing the cover. I can't do that. And I don't know, nor do I have enough time to learn InDesign, so somebody else has got to do the layout. Other than that, I did everything else. I had the vision for what I wanted, you know, this to be, and even for what I could see this looking like as, I mean, it was written for a book, but also what I could see this as graphic novel, live action, animation, all those things. I mean, even the beginning scene where I'm picturing a one take, almost like this Orson Welles Touch of Evil. Anybody know that movie? Please tell me. Okay. So in that movie, there's this long camera, one take, that's going from high to, I pictured that in City Park. I pictured that this very cinematic opening of swooping among the oaks, backed by Harrison Marconi. So we're talking, they say the oaks that are 50 to 90 years old, the baby oaks back then. So Harrison and Marconi, this camera swoop coming down, and visually that's kind of how I saw that. So although I'm a reader and a writer on the page, I wanted this to also have those kind of qualities, you know, at the same time. And then the fun thing was everything that I learned for how to do this and make this happen, have it available to individuals, to bookstores, to library, you know, anybody nationwide. Then, excuse me, then I reached out to the icon, the literary icon of New Orleans. And so about a month ago, Columbia Salon's Walking Blues was the second book that I published. And through writing for Offbeat 64 Parishes, there are enough people that I'm in contact with that I'm hoping that maybe a book or two a year that I can manage that. You know, but I will say though, Shadow is the first of the trilogy. So I'm stepping away from the Del Rey books for a minute. But Shadow is the first of the trilogy, and then the follow-up to that will be out spring of 2025.
We'll come back to that in a moment, because I am curious about you mentioned both of yours, you know, serving as beginnings of series. I'm really intrigued by that. But I just want to point something out here. I mean, for all of the writers in the crowd, or anybody with an artistic or creative vision, I mean, listen to the combination of elements that Danny and Michael have given us here. Vision, right? Ingenuity, resourcefulness, most of all, determination and pluck. You know, willingness to see it through to the end. And we have these magnificent creations as a result. So it's very much an inspiration, I think, to all of us who are working on different kinds of projects that can happen. You can't see, you know, those dreams come true. Plot. We need to talk plot, okay? If the only thing that's interesting is trouble, if the only thing that is interesting is trouble, there's another theory of plot which suggests the only thing which sustains the trouble is attention to propulsion. Okay, thinking of the somewhat crime novelist or gangster novelist in different instances, Michael Ferris Smith, who writes a lot about the role of propulsion in plot. But you guys do something more than just kind of ratcheting up the action angle at every turn. You guys are much more sophisticated in that. You have buried elements. You have elements of the plot which are planted as seeds in one area, and we don't actually see them flower until later, which is always incredibly effective. You have flashbacks serve a very important part of both of your plots, right? To get a sense of who these characters are or who they were before they turned to the kinds of deeds that we now see them committing. Can each of you, Danny, we'll start with you, can each of you all kind of give us a sense about how you conceive of plot or how you approached plot in these novels?
Oh yeah, I use no cards. I make a pile of things I want to happen, things that need to happen, and just random miscellaneous stuff. and I just kind of shuffle it around until I find an order, and then I just start writing. I don't write in order. The last chapter I wrote this book. I actually was like in the middle of the book, so like I read out of order. And for me, it's because like if I don't know how to explain it. It's kind of convoluted. If I know where I'm like, okay. So for book 2 of this, I wrote the last scene first because I know where I want the family to end up, and everything from there I can just kind of work my way back. I find it harder to write in order. So yeah, my process is chaotic, to be honest with you. It's just I shuffle around middle cards, and then I land on the order I like, and then I write from there. And then I write some more. And I actually rewrote that book like 4 or 5 times, I think.
Awesome.
Back to write.
Michael?
I outline heavily. So what I do in advance, once I know all the characters, I write character composites. So I know even if it doesn't end up on the page, then I guess the same way that maybe you'd have for an actor, that there might not be something in the script, but the actor might know some notes that are private that they're going to convey that. So I do that, and then sometimes I even write some scenes in advance, or maybe even some dialogue, just kind of feel it, a little bit. Since I'm writing contemporary New Orleans, one thing that I love to do is what they call, quote, site research, which just means you're going to a spot and walking around. So the thing that I love to do is walk around, talking to people, get a feel, kind of sense for things. Because I can go on to Google, I can look up different things online, but New Orleans, the sensory experience, the being there, is so powerful. So I want to try to convey that, as much as possible, and engage as many senses. At the same time, to almost put somebody into that spot. So the fun thing is, and this took me process-wise a little bit to get to it, but with outlining so heavily, because I didn't in the past, now it's almost like, okay, I know what I'm going to say, I just don't know how I'm going to say it, and I do pen and paper first round. So until pen hits the page, I don't know how I'm going to say it, and then that's the fun. And it allows for me to be much quicker, much more efficient.
Yeah, he just reminded me of something. I actually do something similar. Like I write a story Bible, so like I'm not just winging it entirely with no cards. I kind of bear the lead on that. I actually do like a psychological makeup of the characters, because I feel like if no matter how good your plot is, if the characters are shit, nobody's gonna want to read it. So excuse me, sorry.
We speak French here in New Orleans. It's cool.
And so yeah, I just start writing characters. Like I wrote Jesse, 26. Grew up in an abusive household, and I just go from there on down, because I do think it's important to know more than what you write about in the book, because that does give you an air of realism. Like this is never explicitly stated, but Clyde has OCD. Like there's a scene up in there that like it's not in your face, but he's just shuffling stuff around. Like he just can't leave it alone. Like it just, for me, that feels that even though it's never explicitly stated, I feel like that does like come off the page to some extent and holistically make the characters feel real. So yeah, I started with a character story Bible, and then I just started kind of jotting down all that on those parts.
I'm going to have to go back and reread some of those Clyde sections and look for that. That's really cool. I did not pick up on that. I love that. See, burying for these things to come out later. The last substantive question that I have for both of y'all is arguably strikes at the heart of what it means to write crime fiction. Okay? And after this, I would love, if we have a minute, to get y'all to just read a short passage to everybody before we open it up to the floor for some questions. But this last substantive question that I have is really about what is larger than all of us, and yet what consumes us, what holds our attention, what demands from us. And what I'm talking about here is, of course, the game, the great game. The game of power, the game of influence, the game of control, the game that in crime fiction is the board on which we all play, okay? And both of your novels explore what it means to be a player in the game in very real and very precise and often very, very challenging ways, very, very honest ways. There are factions to whom one must be loyal. There are betrayals which must be answered, right? There are mistakes which must be compensated for. There are also attachments which grow despite the obstacles to them. The other rule of the game, everyone's dirty. Everyone is dirty somehow, some way. And as a very wise friend of mine once explained to me in a different context, he said, everybody has a price. They just may not know it yet. So I'm fascinated with the way that you guys approach the game of the capital G in your novels. And I'm just wondering if you can kind of tell us a little bit about that before we hear from your novel. Daniel, let's start with you.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, in this book, I just like one of the main characters for me in this book that didn't really stick out because it's like not a real character was the city of New Orleans itself. And I kind of just wanted to show the way that you're speaking to the game corrupts everything it touches, like everyone that touches it. Like there's a character in this book named Cameron, and he's supposed to be, I intentionally make him I can't say that word. I intentionally make him the opposite of Jesse. That he is essentially Jesse if Jesse had trust money and grew up in a normal household. And at some point, even he becomes corrupt to his core. It even hurts him. And that's just the way I view stuff. You can't be involved in the type of stuff that the mafia, the Cosa Nostra, and all these other different groups are involved with. Even like if you're just a bad boy without corrupting your soul to some extent. And I also want to show the same thing with the politicians. The politicians were the biggest gangsters back then. They just wore suits and like looked fancy.
That's the thing, and one thing that Danny's novel really engages directly with is the notion that the game extends all the way to the very top. And if you get the right lever, you can move the right mountain when it comes to political decisions, buying off the law, do whatever it is you have to do to get ahead, stay ahead, or break somebody else in the process, whatever it might be. I really appreciated the way you characterized that. Michael, what does the game mean to you?
So I guess I operate with the core premise that everyone is possible of doing or acting on almost anything under certain circumstances. And I don't mean necessarily dystopian, all of a sudden tech crash, electricity's out, almost post-hurricane. Picture post-Katrina out here, which is pretty much like that. It was like, then all of this like Hobbs own life kind of thing. Like things. I mean, in a regular day-to-day kind of thing. I operate by that. So with that being the case, and I'm actually an optimist. So I'm an optimist who also hopes for the best, but sees and knows that too often it's going to be worse. And that's the umbrella.
On that note, we actually need to hear from some of these novels. So would y'all be willing to read just a short passage from your book?
Sure.
Yeah. Nancy, let's start with you.
Like 5 minutes or something?
Yeah. 5 minutes would be great.
Just a heads up, there is some language in this book.
We speak French. It's all good. That's all right.
All right, this is chapter 1, titled The Prince and His Kingdom, and it's take place in late September 1920. Jesse's dreams were interrupted every night by the memory of his father's dead body at the family dinner table. It was propped up in the chair, blood and brain matter sprayed against the wall, a slow stream of crimson flowing from his head like molten lava from a volcano. Jesse was a boy then. He still had kernels stuck in his teeth from the popcorn at the silent picture show that he, his mother, and his brother saw. His mother cried on her knees while trying to uncurl the corpse rigor mortis finger from around the trigger. His baby sister's cries echoing up the hall. The night terror made Jesse tremble in his sleep. He twisted into Cindy and woke her up. She tapped him. His body was damp and sticky, and he muttered in his sleep over the sight of his father's milky eyes, giving him an accusatory glare. No, 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 Jesse pled in his sleep. Cindy tapped his shoulder. It mattered nothing. He was captive in a nightmare no person should have to endure as much as he did. She shoved him this time. He shot up like a piston. Cindy held him and asked, "Are you okay?" Jesse took rapid, shallow breaths and hooked his fingers into the blankets like he could be dragged back to the night terror at any moment. He stared into the dark abyss of his room and could almost see the silhouette of his father's body in the corner, sitting there, mocking him from the shadows, saying in a whisper, why'd you do this, Jesse? Jesse, still in a hazy state, heard the voice ask again, why? Jesse yanked his lamp on and the shadow was gone.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna allow this to be the crowd choice. You tell me, whatever I hear loudest, that's what I'll do. Do you prefer the hearing from the crime boss and when? Or do you want a kind of New Orleans-y sort of thing? Crime boss, let me hear you. I gotta hear you, I can't.
Crime boss!
Okay, New Orleans-y feel, let me hear you.
Yeah, it's hard for us to see you here, so yeah.
All right, I guess we're going to New Orleans. Actually, that's fine too. In New Orleans, do you want, I normally don't do this catering too, but this was kind of a fun chapter. Do you want Bourbon Street or Legion Fields? Bourbon Street. Legion Fields. We got locals, we got locals. And I got one. So this is set up a little bit. This is Maya Gaines. She has 2 French Quarter restaurant jobs. She's biking home. There is no dialogue. This is more kind of setting the feel for that. This is chapter 9. Raise not voice, hand, or weapon in anger. It was close to midnight when Maya clocked out at Brassy, collected her bike, and called it a night. The wall of people on Bourbon Street made it impossible to navigate. Didn't matter, it was Sunday night. Her route was to get down to Charters, closer to the river, and take that one way across the French Quarter. She would continue past Esplanade for just a hint of Frenchman Street, where the party was also going, before making only her second left turn. At that point, it was a straight shot all the way up Elysian Fields. Maya was exhausted and vibing to music to pass the time. Ambient and drifting, anchored by beats. More chill, less street. It wasn't a carefree ride. Being conscious of potholes, reckless drivers, tipsy pedestrians, and anything unexpected came with the territory. The mindset to have was wisdom, not knowledge. Knowledge was recognizing stop signs. Wisdom was pausing before biking across the intersection in case a driver or another bicyclist barreled toward her, disregarding their stop sign. Knowledge was a simple distinction of the Elysian Fields car lanes being separate from the bike lanes. Wisdom was to be prepared for a drunk or inattentive driver veering into her lane, or even other bicyclists pedaling in her direction, which would force one of them to scoot into the adjacent car lane. Expect the unexpected might be the only steady mantra in New Orleans. There was no way, of course, for her to anticipate items in the roadway, especially at night. Whether called caltrops, ninja throwing spikes, or makabishi, small, sharp objects have been used for centuries, mostly in times of war to slow pursuers. In the past 25 years by U.S. law enforcement in the form of spike strips that stretched across the entire road to end the chase. None of these deflated her for an entire hour. In actuality, this was the source. The house on the corner of Elysian Fields and I'm used to reading out of town, and Burgundy, I had the pronunciation check, had needed a new roof for decades. The damage from Hurricane Ida last year on the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina made it a priority. Though the roofers had used a dumpster and a magnetic nail sweeper when they were done in mid-November, nails had bounced across the side street next to an empty lot. There they sat in gutter hibernation for months, covered by leaves, until little by little, wind and the impact from traffic slowly moved the old round-head inch-long nails to bridge the 12-foot gap closer to the main intersection. One of the 5 squirmed into the street just after dusk that night, where it flattened the left front tire of teenage thieves ready for action. This knocked the daily total of car thefts down from the average of 19 to 15. Steady writhing took the second nail further into the street an hour later, where it promptly punctured the right rear tire of a chef on her way to do an evening pop-up. By running late and staying later than expected, she had the luck to meet an investor with deep pockets who thought her vision for cupcakes and cookies with unique images and phrases would be a hit on a bigger scale. The remaining 3 roofing nails inched their way throughout the evening, closer and closer to the bike lane. Those who traversed it had no idea what might have been for them. By the time Maya Gaines dodged a handful of tourists walking out in front of her when she crossed Frenchman Street, the nail trio was in place. Had the bartender bicyclist 2 blocks in front of her on Elysian Fields not been texting, which briefly edged him into the car lane, Maya would have been biking past a person with flat tires instead of her. But instead, it was Maya who ended up with 2 nails in her front tire and 1 in the back, rendering her bike instantly unusable. "Ah, so tired of this," she said, checking that her headband was still on straight and pocketing the 3 nails. Maya would be walking her bike the remaining distance. It was the only way. Aunt Nikisha had answered her call when leaving Brassy, but she was still at work. Maya was frustrated, but not surprised. It was the 3rd time she had to walk her bike home from work for the same reason this year. After moving over to the sidewalk, she continued up Elysian Fields. Over the next 7 blocks, she couldn't help but see that there were no fewer than 3 new roadwork projects on the side streets. This came as less surprise than the nails on the street. If there was a plot, a citywide conspiracy to aggravate as many citizens as possible, it would succeed no better than the City of New Orleans roadwork plan. Block after block all over the city had been torn up, in some cases with full-on excavation, but the work had stopped for several months after that. There were lakes and streets and unused human-sized piles of dirt that had sprouted vegetation. In perhaps the most perverse twist, in some cases, one half of the street was torn up and eventually repaved, while the other side sat unpaved. It was complete disarray. No one had answers. The city blamed the contractors turned it back on the city, publicly that is. Privately, they ate and drank together at the finest restaurants, making merry and mocking the citizens. They both pointed a finger at the sewage and water board. The city council threatened to freeze the public works budget. Hipsters drank cocktails while standing in excavation hole rainwater up to their bric-a-brac jewelry and facial hair tomfoolery. Was there an outcry? A march on City Hall? Citizens who'd had enough? Only about the historic blue and white street name markers that were routinely broken and discarded by the workers. Other than that, as long as the Saints played and the festivals were festive, as long as second lines shook and Mardi Gras didn't get the hook, so be it. Let the streets look good and the roads resemble an archaeological dig. This is how it is, so let the good times roll. Maya was not in the mood to accept the unacceptable, though, not today. The more martial arts classes she'd had with Seafood Julius Mosley, and the more she improved herself, the less time and patience she had for low expectations. It was on her mind as she continued to roll her bike closer to home. "Tired of this," she snapped.
Thank you, Michael. I gotta say, as one who suffered not just 1 but 2 flat tires due to roofing nails last month, the chapter hit a little uncomfortably close to home, but we've got about 15 minutes left. I want to make sure we get some questions in. So it's a little hard to see with these spots in our eyes, but if you raise your hand and just yell your question out, let's get some questions. I'm sure we got some thoughts. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Yeah, sure. Please speak up.
All right. My question is, in writing as you do, you have to get way into the mind of the criminal. And I'm wondering, if you've thought about this, what are the chances that you'll be jaded by all this yourself?
I don't know, like to some extent, like the Pike family, like they do reflect, like I'm not gonna say they reflect my worldview. I'm not out here beating breaking people's legs and back alleys, but like I'm trying to say it like this. Ooh, that's a tough question. Getting inside the head of criminals made me actually more empathetic to them to some extent, because for writing, like reading about different criminals throughout time and whatnot, a lot of them did not have the best home life at all. And like writing about the Pike family, like they are like, if you are a moralistic person, they're not good people. They're not. But like once you start to write about them, like how do they not, like read about them, how do they not turn out the way they turn out? So as far as being like jaded, I'm jaded towards a system that creates so much poverty and pain and hurt in the community, to where there are a Pike family, to where they do have people that have to join the mafia and stuff like that, because that's all that stuff's about. A lot of these gangs from the early 1900s, they were immigrants, they were people who were poor, who wanted to defend their neighborhood, and then the government made the dumbass decision to make alcohol illegal, and then they were like, oh, we can sell this and make money. So now they went from just, terrorizing their neighborhoods to now terrorizing the whole city and their country. And to me, that's not gonna, like, I'm not gonna take agency away from grown-ass men, but the society that we have, like, created these people. So I'm jaded towards a society that creates these criminals, less so than I am the criminals themselves. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Thank you.
I love your question, and I live that question actually. So up until the first draft of manuscript for the follow-up book to Shadow, I hadn't felt, obviously these plots are put together, and as Danny said, also the characters. You realize, I think when you realize the context of the characters, that also kind of gives a different perspective. But it wasn't until writing this follow-up book over the summer that there was, let's say, a situation, because there's multiple characters involved in the way this happens by necessity, that it hit me so strongly just in the first draft that I didn't sleep well that night for the next few nights. But the thing was, it was for what I was expressing, and just, and it's the reason I like to do pen on paper, because it slows me down a little bit, as compared to typing, and I'm more effective. But also, it makes me think a little deeper, but what really struck me was not only that what I'm writing on the page is this, but also what I'm writing is a fictional version of what's actually happening in New Orleans right now. And that can be hard, that things that go on and enough people know about this, but yet it's glossed over, and this is about as horrific as it gets. Yeah, that hit me a lot for the first time.
This book definitely, that was a good question. I'm David. I'm over here doing some very deep introspection right now. The writing this book actually did, I'm trying to remember what my thought process was at the time, but the process I ended up on was that crime is not a moral issue, it's a socio-economic one. If you don't have food to eat and somebody next to you does, we still need things to survive. You're going to do what you need to in order to survive. And that's not the way I felt before working on this book. And that's kind of what I meant by I ended up being more jaded towards the society that allows for these people to exist in the first place than the criminals themselves. Because to me, that makes sense. If I ain't got something, somebody else got it, and I need that, I'm going to go take it. Well, not me, but anyway, bigger than me. So that makes sense. But in this book, the reason why I wanted to show the politicians, they already have everything. And them taking even more is creating the white family. So that's, I don't know.
And there's a very real illustration of that principle in that, halfway through the book, Jesse, who's the main character, he decides consciously that he wants to start leaving his old life behind and starting fresh and getting out and trying to follow the straight and narrow, so to speak. Now, I'm not going to say what happens because, you've got to go read the book, but that sense of, focusing on the individual and the choices they are trying to make, and you keep getting pulled back is very real tension within the book. Let's get another question going. Who else? Oh, I know we got at least one more out there. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
So the element of suspense, which we hadn't really discussed in this session, I'd be curious to hear what our authors saw as their way of building suspense in their novel.
Could everybody get the question? How did our authors build suspense in the writing of their books?
So this is an idea I actually took from a comic book writer, because I wanted to be a comic book writer at one point, where for every few pages of boring stuff going on, something he sets off a proverbial bomb, something exciting has to happen. So in my book, I tried to start off with the heist, because I don't like slow starts. So that's why I start with the heist, and then from there it's just building to who the characters are and the world is. And I feel like that gives enough space for the reader away from the action. And I feel like to help build that suspense for the next big proverbial bomb to go off. So it's kind of I kind of think of writing like music to some extent. It's kind of you don't want to have I don't know if there's any dubstep listeners up in there, you don't want to have too much action close up together, because at that point you're kind of devaluing it, but you don't want the book to be boring as hell because people ain't going to read it. So I try to, for every 2 chapters of world building, somebody got to get wiped. That's that's kind of my logic, I'm being honest with you. And I also try to leave breadcrumbs throughout. Try to leave room for the characters to just kind of explore the world, but also throughout I'm leaving plants throughout, so that the reader can kind of piece together that, maybe this might be a part of something bigger later, and then when it does happen, then I don't know if it makes sense, but that's what I try to do.
I got to echo Danny on this, because so this is a Dickensian novel of 1920s New Orleans. It's a longer novel, and I have to single him out for some really specific praise here. The middle never sags. And so often in long fiction, you get an explosive start, you get a crazy finish, but it's that middle where you just feel like you're kind of slogging to get through and so forth. Like, what is happening here? There's just too much. Never happens in the Pike Boys. There is always something leading you forward to the next scene, to the next chapter, some unpredictable element, some logical outcome of a terrible decision, and I really got to salute you for that, because it is hard to sustain that tension. So very, very, very well done.
Yeah, the note card.
There it is. All about the note cards. Michael, how do you build suspense?
So Shadow's a little different because of, again, the characters. So, ma'am, question, with the three main characters, there's a certain inevitability that they will all come together. You're just not quite sure, it's sort of wind them up and you're not quite sure how that's going to happen. Eventually, and this isn't giving anything away, eventually you learn that Maya is the one, the unintentional connector. And by the time you get to a point in the book where Ben was talking about flashbacks, there's a flashback scene that takes place in 1991 New York City that is told from two different perspectives. And you know at that point, okay, this is definitely who's about to meet and who's bringing them together. I also, I guess, kind of like Davey said, you know, you got some chapters that are there to you know, kind of move the plot forward, set the tone, but I would say there are a number of chapters that I'm conscious, this needs to end, you know, almost like a scene that you're watching on a show. You're going to commercial break, you've got to end with some point of tension or some way that you're wondering what's going to happen when you come back to it, for sure. And the next chapter might be in a different place, but when you return to this setting, you're wondering what's going to happen next.
That multi-perspectival approach is really effective in Michael's book, because what you see in the first instance is one character's version of the story, and then you absolutely see the other character's version in a way which reveals more about them than you ever could have imagined. And it's more than a light bulb moment. It's a kind of a reversal almost, which felt really integral to the plot. We've got time for about one more question before we could begin to wrap up. Who else out there would like to ask Michael or Danny something, or both of our office? Baby, would the baby like to ask a question? Your son, would he like to chime in here? Yeah.
Probably a good question.
All right. Well, I'll ask one because it is something that both of you have alluded to, and it is very tantalizing. This thought that both Maya Gaines and Jesse Pike are characters that we have not seen the last of. Each of you has said that both of your books hope to be the beginning of a series. So can each of y'all tell us a little bit about what that might look like and when we can return to the mean streets of New Orleans with each of them?
Oh yeah, the second book is going to take place, the middle part is going to take place through Mardi Gras. There's this big thing I'm trying to work towards. It's not set in stone yet, but that's pretty much what book 2 is going to be. If this is their origin story, the book 2 is where everything starts to fall in place, and then book 3 is going to be wherever that stuff starts crumbling down on you, and so on and so forth. But yeah, that's what I do have solidified for a fact, is that book 2 will take place, a huge chunk of it during Mardi Gras. A congregation of Southern gangsters stuff will happen.
How many note cards you got so far?
Huh?
How many note cards you got so far on this one?
I keep losing track of them.
No, that's a good sign. That's a good sign. Michael, how about you?
So Shadow again is the first of the trilogy. Second book will be out in the spring. Excuse me, I actually just dropped the cover a couple weeks ago. So cover reveal for that. So in this first book, Maya's finding her way. The second book, she's here. And one of the key themes for her is regaining family. So she does that, but going with unintended consequences or no good deed goes unpunished. In doing so, she ends up getting blackmailed and gets put in a situation that she thought she was past. So it continues again with it's very New Orleans-y martial arts, but also essentially a straightforward women's drama. So that'll be, and that's. Let's say it begins with her feeling like, okay, everything is easy peasy by comparison, and it ends with her having to regroup herself. So the third book will be sort of the return after all of this. And it's one thing I'll say is key is not just with the title, but the cover is a silhouette. So the first book, you see her from behind. The second book, she's going to be in profile. The third book, she's face forward. So this, all of this is within time.
That's cool. You know, I gotta say, just as far as characterization goes, there are a few more electrifying kinds of characters than the avenging angel, right? And I gotta put in a plug for Catherine Minn's novel, The Fetishist, which Caitlin and Andrews will be speaking about on her panel a little later this afternoon. Her mother's posthumous novel, The Fetishist, has one of the most gripping avenging angels in all of fiction I've read in the past couple of years, so something to look forward to there. Thank you guys both so much. I want to say that both authors will be able to sell some that books are available for sale out in the foyer, and both authors would be delighted to sell signed copies, sell them for sure. Thank you guys both so much for your time. They really are incredible books, and congratulations to you both. Can't wait to see where they go.
Thank you.